We cry for peace and rest for all people. We welcome friends from far and near. We fight for those whose voices are silenced, resisting in faith until all are free. We dream a world of justice and kindness. We build a bridge, creating new paths. We march with joy as all walk together, embracing each one. We boldly stand.
Hi, this is from Cure, an online journal, May 22nd, 2015, and the author is anonymous. I've always disliked the book of Job in the Bible. The idea of God laying a bet with Satan to test the strength of Job's faith by hurting him and taking away everything that he loves and cares about is a disturbing idea, to say the least. But there is one important message I heard in reading the story, and that is the reaction of Job's friends. Job's life is being whittled away bit by bit. He has lost his crops, his livestock, and his family. He is truly aggrieved. Job's friends live a distance from him, but they come together and decide to visit Job in order to help him mourn. For the first 7 days, they merely sit with him quietly. They do not say a word. They support him, let him have his sadness, and be there with him in his time of trial. But finally, they speak. They say it is his fault he has lost so much because he has sinned. He deserved what he got. And then, after berating him, they begin to give him advice. And they do not stop giving him advice. For pages and pages, they give him advice. Even when Job tells his friends that they are miserable comforters, they still will not stop giving him advice. Want to know my favorite part in the book of Job? After pages and pages and pages of the friends' advice giving, God finally speaks from a whirlwind. He asks Job's friends, "Who are you to talk?" And then he tells them to shut up. Best moment ever. What really impressed me in Job's story was the 7 days his friends sat with him and gave him comfort. I know I've been guilty of wanting to fix things for a friend, giving advice instead of comfort. But really, the most valuable gift a friend can provide is quiet and steady support. As Henry J.M. Nouwen so aptly stated, when we honestly ask ourselves which person in our lives mean the most to us, we often find that it is those who, instead of giving advice, solutions, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a warm and tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face us with the reality of our powerlessness. That is a friend who cares. My lesson from the book of Job: mourn with a friend. Sit with a friend and shut the heck up. It's a lesson I sure need to remember. So I'll shut up now, and I'll be here for you when you need a comforting friend.
Who are you listening to? What are you listening to? Take a minute just to listen to what's happening in your head right now. What you'll probably hear is the sound of your own voice thinking thoughts, right? So how does that voice sound? See if you can access the general tone. Is it an insistent voice? Is it worried? Is it angry? Is it a quiet voice? Is it thoughtful? Is it scattered? Whatever it is, just note that. And we'll get back to it. If I seem to be speaking at a slower pace today, it might be because I've just finished the 3rd week of training to become a certified spiritual director. And spiritual direction has a way of slowing the speech and giving the mouth, the mind, and the soul a lot more time to coordinate. The first 2 weeks of my training were in Tucson, Arizona, at a monastery in the desert in February of 2020 when I was on sabbatical. There were 30 of us gathered from all over the country, and we were supposed to return for the subsequent 3rd and 4th week in April, but you know what happened in March. So now there are 27 of us on Zoom for 7 or 8 hours a day, and it's actually been pretty good. I appreciate having the experience of being online all day, because I know many of you are working that way and also going to school under those same conditions. I was raised in a household where fast repartee was the norm. Being able to jump into a fast-paced conversation with sharp commentary was actually how you earned your status in the pecking order of our immediate family and our extended family. You had to be able to land a verbal blow in an argument. This isn't something I'm proud of. This is just I'm sharing with you some of my family culture. And a lot of our conversations kind of morphed into arguments and then very comfortably segued back into becoming just nice conversations. So that kind of escalation of tone in aggression was very natural for us. And we kids were regularly subjected to guerrilla quizzes on national events or current events, history, and culture by our education-obsessed Jewish patriarchs. We were fast, we were sharp, it was shiny, highly educated, snap, 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 you know. So that was the mode of communication also that was primary in my social groups. Again, very fast, very witty, keen observers, very opinionated, aggressive, a lot of knockdown, drag out, conversational jousts that really weren't even intended to settle any matter, but they were kind of the verbal equivalent of of the dance at the gym scene in West Side Story. You know, the sharks and the jets. Dun 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 dun. Mambo. That was how we communicated. When I moved to Minnesota as a young adult, I was constantly called outrageous and over the top. Oh my gosh, Vicky, she's so crazy. This is because I am culturally a New York Jew, and there really weren't many of us in the Twin Cities in those days. I didn't figure that out for a while until after I left. I wasn't over the top on the East Coast, but I remember one time being in Rainbow Foods in St. Paul, and a woman cut in front of me in line, and I just said to her, "Ma'am, excuse me, I was here. The line starts over there." And she turned around, and with great shock, she said to me, "Oh my God, you don't have to be so mean about it." So communication styles are very cultural. This was funny at the time, but it's less funny when we think about how often complaints about communication styles are based on sexist or racist or white supremacist expectations of how everyone should sound when they express themselves, what moods they're allowed to convey, how directly they're allowed to address an issue, apparently not at all in St. Paul, Minnesota, with that one person, and how passionate they're allowed to be. And if they are passionate, how is that interpreted by the dominant culture? So I would like to ask you to think for a moment about the communication culture in your family of origin. How about in your peer group? What's the communication culture in your workplace? How about in the various organizations that you belong to? And as you think through this, are there any of these places that where the communication cultures are in tension or create some conflict either within you or within the space itself? What is the communication culture in Unitarian Universalist congregations and in ours? I've loved and appreciated the resources and insights provided by anti-racism and anti-oppression models that have helped us to look without fear at our own communication styles, assumptions, and expectations, and that have helped us to understand wherever we are, ethnically, culturally, racially, theologically, all of those differences, that help us all to understand why our listening skills are so frayed and shoddy. And these are resources that help us to find the gleaming threads within those tangles that we can pick up and use to connect us with one another with more love and openness and spiritual maturity. Just watching even part of the recent presidential, not so presidential, and vice presidential debates were a great object lesson in aggressive, dominating communication styles, lack of listening, and a revelation of the ways that creativity, possibility, vision, and honesty get cast aside in really important deciding moments in favor of getting one's predetermined talking point or content across, or starting a fight, or distracting or blaming. If you feel traumatized or anxious watching these spectacles, there's a good reason. It's because they are done within a violent communication style. And so it is natural that you should be activated by that. Deep listening isn't just a nice thing to do for the sake of it. It undoes anxiety and trauma. It heals and transforms. When we are really listening, we are expansive and we are open. And that makes a huge, huge, huge difference. Words are not a barrage coming back and forth, but when they're spoken at all, they're an offering. They're a revelation of the speaker's heart and mind. I have found in listening sessions, whether I am the directee or the director, that my breathing slows and my blood pressure feels like it's going down. I'm not on the tip of my toes with what I feel I need to say or want to say. The biggest liberation, although it is scary at first, is to go in with very little to say, just to trust that I'll be given whatever is important to say. And it's very humbling because doing this, you realize so much of what I say was unnecessary, so it's learning. What we offer by our listening is our presence. And if no one has ever told you that it is your presence, your very being, that is of the most cherished value of all the things you have to give in your lifetime, Would you believe me? Would you even know what I mean? Your presence is precious. And if you don't know what that means, it's so important. I want you to know and understand what that means and to trust it. Like Job's friends, okay, they showed up. He was in absolute ruin, physically, professionally, emotionally. And before they launched into their brainy ideas and their big advice and their, blame and concepts about what Job was going through and why, they just sat with him. They just sat with him for 7 days. That's presence. Maybe they brought him something to drink or to eat, but really they just sat with him. That someone would show up to honor a situation, a relationship, a community, enough to show up with that kind of generosity of spirit is an act of transforming love. Because they show up for the other person and they are not inflicting their ego needs on that person. They don't show up loaded for bear. They don't show up to gloat or to gossip. Do they show up with so many plans and opinions that there will be no room in them to receive a fresh insight from the others who have shown up? That's another thing that we do. I want to encourage you in days and weeks to come to understand the preciousness of your very presence and to trust that it is more than enough, almost 100% of the time, for the thing that you care about and the person that you care about. Trust that there is a source of wisdom and insight that isn't contained in any religious creed, but is intuited and taught by every spiritual philosophy and all religious traditions, that moves through our shared human experience. And that listening for that wisdom together is the truest way to access it. Sometimes I do wish that the Quakers, the friends of the silent group process, had merged with the Unitarians and the Universalists as they all once discussed. It might have been a really good ameliorating kind of influence on UUs because we are such a talky people. Very early on, even with my rat-a-tat-tat mouthiness and verbal jousting with others, I did learn that I loved nothing more than one-on-one conversation with someone where we could talk and wonder and have silences in between our shared thoughts. In that kind of conversation, which I used to have with my father and with my best friend Melissa during many sleepovers in elementary school, I would feel life slow down, and I could kind of even feel the spinning of the earth. And some kind of deep feeling would come up through the earth and transmit itself between me and the words and my loved one. I felt the presence of a holiness that I believe is at the heart of being. And as I got older, I found that I was less and less drawn to socialize in groups and more to crave that slow, thoughtful, silence-filled kind of companionship with one or two simpatico people. So today, and really always, I want to be an ambassador of silence and listening for this community. I live alone in a mostly silent environment, and I know the thought of that might cause some of you to have a sense of dismay, like, oh God, that's not for me. And some of you might feel an intense craving for that much quiet in your own days. So how can you find a balance? How can you construct the place and practice within yourself to slow down the relentless noise and talking in your head and in your life? One thing you could do is join Anne Principe's meditation group every morning at 7:30 for 20 minutes. You can find an invitation to that on our weekly update. Our dialogue group continues to meet and practices exactly this kind of receptive silence. Our wisdom circle. So check our lifelong learning category on our website, uucgl.org. Even our anti-racism book conversation that we are going to be doing for the first time October 14th will be facilitated in a way that very intentionally disengages all the participants from the defense, debate, arguing, pontificating mode with which we so often participate in small group discussion. Instead of offering our analyses and opinions, which no one has asked for, least of all the author, Abram X. Kendi, we'll share what's resonating for us. I feel it's a little different. It's a different orientation. We will identify where in the book we feel an opening or a blockage, and what might that mean? We will not proceed as if the role of the author is to gain our approval or 4 stars or 5 stars on a rating system, which is really how much of our lives have begun to unfold. You know, you have a meal and you take a picture and you give it a rating, right? Everything is rated. We're going to try to undo some of that and set it aside. As people who've been on the margins move into the center of the national conversation, they are not requesting approval, but solidarity. Listening is an act of solidarity. So this goes way deeper than just not listening or just not giving advice or interrupting. It's a way of showing up for someone else's experience in a way that doesn't assess and judge their experience against our own to find it valid or not. It's very, very challenging to dismantle this inner critic, the inner sarcasm chimp, the inner all-knowing one. And just to listen, to receive, to hold with someone. All of those aspects of ourselves, which I've just named, the inner critic and so on, they're just ego defense mechanisms. We don't really need them. They don't serve us. So there's great joy in letting them take a break. Send them out to the backyard to play in the dirt. It's very, very life-giving to do that. I promise you, because I'm working on this myself. I'd like to ask you to try an experiment. Try waking up and then going into silence for 10 or so minutes. You could do 20 or 30 minutes if you can spare that. Do whatever you normally do, but in silence if you can. And this is a way to begin to hear what your own thoughts really are before you go into reaction mode or opinion mode or fix-it mode, which many of you do, especially if you're taking care of children. Just see who's in there. How's that inner voice? One of you said at coffee hour recently that you were coping with her anxiety in COVID times, and of course in the midst of our national crisis of democracy and decency, by learning more and taking in more information. And oh, did I resonate with that? And I thought, yes, salvation by information. So many of us do that. But salvation, which means to save at its root, will not come by accruing more information. We may, however, be saved by listening, by gaining the inner freedom and expansiveness that can come when we attend to reality and show up for each other without an agenda, without a formed opinion, and without our egos running the show, when it is our hearts and souls that have far more wisdom and deeper wisdom, and that most desire and deserve to be heard. Thank you for listening. When someone deeply listens to you, it is like holding out a dented cup you've had since childhood and watching it fill up with cold, fresh water. When it balances the top of the brim, you are understood. When it overflows and touches your skin, you are loved. When someone deeply listens to you, the room where you stay starts a new life, and the place where you wrote your first poem
begins to glow in your mind's eye. It is as if gold had been discovered. When someone deeply listens to you, your bare feet are on the earth, and a beloved land that seemed distant is now at home within you. Spirit of compassion, be within us and among us today. Help us to listen. Let us be held in a silence of companionship, of healing, and of peace. Amen.
When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out.